My 16-year-old son came home from school carrying a brand new MacBook Pro. Not used, not refurbished, still sealed in the original Apple box. At first I assumed he'd borrowed it from a friend or maybe won it in some school competition. Then he placed the receipt on the kitchen counter. $2,487, paid in cash. I stared at it for several seconds before looking back at him. "Where did you get this?" He shrugged like it wasn't anything unusual. "A friend gave it to me." "What friend?" "He doesn't really want people to know." I laughed because I honestly thought he was messing with me. He wasn't. 2 weeks later, someone left a brand new PlayStation 5 on our front porch. A week after that, a mountain bike worth several $1,000s appeared in our driveway with Noah's name attached to the handlebars. Then came an envelope containing $5,000 in $100 bills. No note, no return address, nothing. At first I thought someone was trying to manipulate my son. By the time I called the police, I was convinced of it. What I never expected was discovering that the man behind those gifts wasn't trying to take something from Noah. He believed he owed our family a debt that could never truly be repaid. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 46 years old and I live in Bend, Oregon, where I've worked as a mechanical engineer for nearly 20 years. My job isn't exciting, but it's stable. I design heating and ventilation systems for commercial buildings, and most days every problem has a logical answer. I used to think life worked the same way. Then my wife, Emily, died of ovarian cancer. She was only 39. Our son Noah had just turned 11. People like to say children are resilient, but resilience isn't the same thing as healing. Noah buried himself in school, soccer, and computers. I buried myself in work because it was easier than sitting alone in a quiet house filled with reminders of the person we'd lost. 5 years passed before life started feeling normal again, or at least close enough that we could pretend. Noah was a good kid. He earned solid grades, stayed out of trouble, and spent most weekends at the public library teaching himself programming or building small robotics projects. I wasn't a perfect father. I worked late too often and occasionally missed school events. But we trusted each other. At least I believed we did. The MacBook appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. Noah carried it into the kitchen with the same expression he'd have if he were showing me a new notebook. "Dad, look what I got." I nearly dropped my coffee. "Where did you get that?" "My friend." "The same friend?" He nodded. "What did you do to deserve a laptop that costs more than my first car?" A small smile crossed his face. "He says every kid who wants to learn deserves the right tools." The answer sounded strangely rehearsed, not fake, just repeated. I leaned against the counter. "Noah, people don't usually spend thousands of dollars on someone they barely know." "I know. So why you?" He hesitated before answering. "I think he just likes helping people." I wanted to believe him. More than anything, I wanted this to be some generous retired millionaire with too much money and a soft spot for smart kids. But every instinct I had as a father told me something wasn't right. The next afternoon I drove Noah to soccer practice and decided to ask again. "So tell me about this guy." "There isn't much to tell." "How old is he?" "I don't know. Maybe late 60s. "Where did you meet him?" "At the library." That surprised me. Noah spent hours there every weekend. "What happened?" "I couldn't get one of the 3D printers to work. He showed me how. And then we talked." "For how long?" "Maybe 20 minutes. "What did you talk about?" "My science project. Programming." "Mom." That last word caught me off guard. "You told him about your mother." Noah looked out the window. "He asked why I liked engineering so much. So I told him she always encouraged me to build things." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "What was his name?" "I honestly don't know." "You never asked?" "He said names weren't important." That sentence bothered me for the rest of the drive. 3 weeks passed without another surprise, and I slowly convinced myself I'd overreacted. Then Saturday morning arrived. I opened the front door and nearly tripped over a large cardboard box. No shipping label, no company logo, just Noah's name written neatly across the top. He carried it inside and opened it while I stood there watching. Inside was a brand new PlayStation 5, an extra controller, a wireless headset, and 6 games that were all still wrapped in plastic. I looked at my son. "You didn't ask for this?" He shook his head immediately. "No? Did he tell you he was sending it?" "No." I sat down at the kitchen table and rubbed my forehead. "I'm not angry, Noah." He looked confused. "Then why do you look like that?" "Because this isn't normal." He quietly sat across from me. "He never asks me for anything." I nodded slowly. "I know." He couldn't understand why that made me even more worried. The people who expect something usually make their intentions obvious. The ones who don't are much harder to figure out. Daniel Harper, 46 years old, mechanical engineer. I solve problems for a living, which is probably why I kept looking for a logical explanation long after logic had stopped making sense. The morning after the PlayStation arrived, I called the local police department. I wasn't accusing anyone of a crime yet, but I wanted the situation documented before it became something worse. Officer Melissa Grant came by that afternoon, looked through the unopened box, photographed everything, and asked Noah the same questions I'd been asking for weeks. "Has this man ever touched you?" "No." "Asked you to keep secrets from your dad?" "No." "Invited you to his house?" "No." "Given you a phone number?" Again, Noah shook his head. "He doesn't even have a cell phone. At least I've never seen one." Melissa looked at me. "That actually makes this stranger." I was thinking the opposite. She smiled faintly. "Most predators want direct contact. This man seems determined to avoid it." That wasn't exactly reassuring. Before leaving, she handed me her card. "If he gives Noah anything else, call me immediately." "I will." She paused at the front door. "And don't let your son meet him alone again." That evening, I sat down with Noah after dinner. "I need you to understand something." "I do." "No, I don't think you do." I leaned forward. "If this man approaches you again, I want you to leave immediately and call me." Noah looked genuinely confused. "But why?" "Because you don't know him." "I know enough." "What does that mean?" He hesitated. "He's nice." I couldn't help sighing. So was Ted Bundy. "Dad, I'm serious." He looked down at his plate before quietly saying, "He never tries to make me stay. He never asks personal questions. Most of the time we just talk about science or books." "Then why spend thousands of dollars on you?" For the first time, Noah didn't have an answer. A week passed without another gift. I started hoping the whole thing was over. Then I came home from work on Friday and found Noah standing in the driveway beside a brand new mountain bike. Not an ordinary bike. A high-end carbon fiber model I'd only ever seen in specialty stores. A small envelope was taped to the handlebars. Inside was a receipt showing it had been purchased that morning for just over $4,000. Paid in cash. Nothing else. No message. No signature. I looked around the neighborhood, half expecting someone to step out and explain the joke. Nobody did. This time I didn't wait. I drove straight to the sporting goods store listed on the receipt. The manager remembered the purchase immediately. Older gentleman, gray hair, baseball cap. "Did he say anything?" "He asked us to assemble the bike and deliver it." "Did he leave a name?" The manager checked the sales record. "No." "He paid cash." "What about security cameras?" "We still have the footage." 20 minutes later, we were watching it together. The man stood with his back to the camera almost the entire time. He wore sunglasses despite being indoors and kept the brim of his cap pulled low. The image never captured his face clearly, but one detail caught my attention. As he signed the delivery paperwork, he removed one glove. A long scar ran across the back of his left hand. It looked old, almost surgical. The manager paused the video. "That's about the best image we've got." It wasn't much, but it was the first real clue I'd had. That night I showed the footage to Noah. He looked at the screen for a few seconds before nodding. "That's him." "You've seen his face before." "Not clearly." "Then how do you know?" "The way he walks." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He limps a little." I replayed the video. Sure enough, there was a slight hitch in the man's step, so subtle I'd missed it the first time. "Did he ever tell you his name?" "No." "Did he ever say where he lived?" "No." "What did he call you?" "Noah." "And what did you call him?" "Noah." And what did you call him? Noah smiled awkwardly. I never called him anything. The answer somehow made the entire situation feel even stranger. Two people had spent weeks talking to each other, and neither one knew the other's name. The following Monday, Officer Grant called. I checked every report that matched your description. Nothing. Nothing recent. She hesitated before adding, but there is one thing. What? The library has security cameras. If your son met this man there, there's a chance he's been recorded. That was the first genuinely hopeful lead we'd had. The next afternoon, Noah and I drove to the library together. The director listened carefully as I explained the situation. When I mentioned the expensive gifts, her expression changed. I think I know who you're talking about. My heart skipped a beat. You do? She nodded slowly. I've seen him here for years. He comes in almost every Saturday. Always sits in the engineering section. But I've never heard anyone call him by name. For the first time, it felt like we were finally getting close to finding the man who had quietly walked into our lives and changed everything. The library director led us into a small office behind the front desk and explained that their security footage was only kept for 30 days unless the police requested it. Since Noah had been meeting the man almost every Saturday, there was a good chance the cameras had captured him. Officer Grant arrived about 20 minutes later with the paperwork, and together we started reviewing the recordings. The first hour was useless. Families checking out books, college students studying, retirees reading newspapers. Then Noah suddenly leaned toward the monitor. There. An older man wearing a dark jacket walked into the engineering section carrying 2 books. He moved slowly, with the slight limp Noah had mentioned. A few minutes later, Noah entered the frame, and the man smiled before pointing toward one of the shelves. For nearly half an hour they simply talked. No envelopes, no gifts, no suspicious behavior. When Noah couldn't find a robotics book, the man reached up, pulled it from the top shelf, and handed it to him. Officer Grant watched quietly. I've seen far more concerning conversations. So have I admitted. But I still don't understand the gifts. The director checked the visitor records. We don't require library cards to read inside the building, but many regular visitors still use them. She searched the database for several minutes before shaking her head. Nothing. So he never checked out books? Apparently not. He just came here to read. That made the whole situation even stranger. Someone had spent years sitting in the library every weekend without ever borrowing a single book. Before leaving, the director remembered something. Wait. She disappeared into a storage room and returned carrying a small cardboard box filled with lost and found items. He left this a few months ago. Inside was a fountain pen. Heavy, black, beautifully made. The cap was engraved with 2 small initials. A.M. Officer Grant looked at me. Does that mean anything to Noah? He shook his head. I've never seen him use it. The director smiled. He came back the next weekend looking for it, but another visitor had accidentally taken it home. Was he upset? I asked. Not really. He just laughed and said it had belonged to an old friend. An old friend. For some reason, that sentence stayed with me. That evening, I searched every public record I could find for anyone in the area whose initials matched A.M. There were hundreds. Nothing stood out. Then Noah walked into my office holding one of the programming books the stranger had recommended weeks earlier. Dad. He opened the cover. I never noticed this. Written neatly inside the front cover was a short message. To Arthur, keep building things that matter. There was no last name, no date, just one signature. Emily. My heart stopped. I took the book from Noah and stared at the handwriting. It looked familiar. Not because I'd seen those exact words before, because I'd spent 20 years watching my wife write grocery lists, birthday cards, and little notes she used to leave on the refrigerator. I hurried upstairs and opened the box where I'd kept some of Emily's old journals. My hands were shaking. I compared the handwriting, the shape of the letters, the way she crossed her T's, the long curve on every capital E. It was identical. I looked at Noah. I think, my voice caught for a moment. I think your mom knew this man." Neither of us spoke. Everything I'd believed about the mysterious gifts suddenly changed. This wasn't a random stranger choosing a bright kid at the library. Somehow, the man giving my son thousands of dollars had known my wife years before either of us ever met him. And for the first time since the gifts started arriving, I wasn't trying to figure out who he was. I was trying to understand why Emily had never told me about him. I barely slept that night. After comparing the handwriting half a dozen times, I still reached the same conclusion. The note inside the book had been written by Emily. Not someone with similar handwriting. Emily. The woman I'd been married to for 15 years had known the mysterious stranger years before Noah ever met him. The only question was why she'd never mentioned him. The next morning I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been there in months. Standing beside Emily's grave, I felt ridiculous for expecting answers from someone who could no longer give them. On the drive home, I realized there was one person who might. Emily's older sister, Rachel. If anyone knew about her life before we met, it would be her. I called that afternoon. "Rachel, can I ask you something a little strange?" "Of course." "Did Emily ever know someone named Arthur?" There was complete silence, not confusion. Silence. When Rachel finally spoke, her voice was noticeably quieter. "Where did you hear that name?" So she did know him. Another long pause. "I thought she'd told you." "Told me what?" Rachel sighed. "I think we should talk in person." I drove to Portland the following morning. Rachel had already made coffee when I arrived, but neither of us touched it. She stared out the kitchen window for several seconds before speaking. "Arthur wasn't family. He wasn't a boyfriend either, if that's what you're thinking." I hadn't been. At least not until she'd said it. "So who was he?" Rachel smiled faintly. "The smartest kid in Emily's high school. They were science partners for almost 3 years. They built everything together. Robots, model bridges, engineering competitions. They were inseparable." I listened without interrupting. After graduation, life took them in different directions. Emily went to college. Arthur stayed home to care for his father after he became sick. They slowly lost contact. I frowned. If they drifted apart, why would he suddenly spend thousands of dollars on Noah? Rachel looked at me with sad eyes. "Because Noah reminds him of someone." She disappeared upstairs and returned carrying an old photo album. Halfway through was a picture I'd never seen before. Emily couldn't have been older than 17. She was standing beside a skinny boy with messy brown hair, both of them covered in grease while holding what looked like a homemade robot. Written beneath the picture were 4 words: "First place, finally." Rachel smiled. "They spent an entire summer building that thing." I couldn't help smiling too. Emily looked happier than I'd ever seen in a photograph. Then I turned the page. Another picture. This one stopped me cold. Arthur's left hand rested on the workbench. Across the back of it ran a long scar, exactly like the one I'd seen on the security footage from the bike shop. The same man. There was no doubt anymore. Before I left, Rachel handed me a folded envelope. I almost forgot. Emily asked me to keep this years ago. If Arthur ever came looking for her, or if I ever thought he needed to hear from her, I was supposed to give it to him. I looked at the envelope. The front simply read, "For Arthur." It had never been opened. I looked back at Rachel. "Why didn't you send it?" She slowly shook her head. "I never knew where he went." I turned the envelope over in my hands. For the first time since the gifts had started appearing, I wasn't trying to stop the mysterious stranger anymore. I needed to find him. Not because I wanted answers about the presents, because I was holding a letter that had been waiting more than 20 years to reach the man it was written for. I left Rachel's house carrying the envelope as if it were made of glass. For more than 20 years, it had waited for one person. Now, somehow, it had ended up in my hands. The problem was, I still had no idea where Arthur was. The only place I knew he'd been recently was the public library. So the next Saturday, Noah and I went back. We waited almost 2 hours. Just as I was beginning to think he wasn't coming, Noah quietly touched my arm. "Dad." I looked toward the entrance. The older man from the security footage had just walked inside. Gray jacket, baseball cap, a slight limp. He carried 2 books under one arm and walked straight toward the engineering section without noticing us. For a moment, I simply watched him. This was the man who had quietly changed our lives. I took a deep breath and walked over. "Arthur?" He looked up. For the first time, I saw genuine surprise on his face. "I think we need to talk." He glanced at Noah, then back at me before giving a small nod. "I suppose we do." We walked to a quiet cafe a few blocks away. Arthur ordered black coffee. Noah chose hot chocolate. For nearly a minute, none of us spoke. Finally, I placed the unopened envelope on the table. "I think this belongs to you." The moment Arthur saw Emily's handwriting, the color drained from his face. His fingers froze above the envelope. "Where did you get this?" "Her sister." He stared at it for several seconds before carefully opening it. He read the first few lines, then stopped. His eyes filled with tears. He quietly folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. "I never thought I'd see this again." "I'm sorry," I said, "but I need to understand something." "Why Noah? Why the gifts?" Arthur looked at my son before answering. "The first day I met him, he was trying to fix a broken 3D printer." He smiled faintly. "Emily used to make exactly the same face whenever something refused to work." He looked down at his coffee. For a second, it felt like she'd walked back into the room. Neither Noah nor I interrupted. Arthur continued. "She was the reason I became an engineer. When my father got sick, I had to leave school and stay home. I always believed I'd wasted my chance. But Emily never let me think that. She kept telling me that building things mattered more than having a degree." He laughed quietly. "I didn't believe her back then." He looked at Noah again. "The first time we talked, he told me he wanted to study engineering. Then he mentioned his mother's name. I don't think he even realized what he'd said. I just sat there, trying to understand how someone I'd lost contact with decades ago could suddenly have a son sitting across from me. I finally asked the question that had been haunting me for weeks. "So you bought him a laptop?" Arthur nodded. I remembered how many opportunities I missed because I couldn't afford the right equipment. So I decided Noah wouldn't have the same problem. "The PlayStation?" A small smile appeared on his face. "That one wasn't practical. I just remembered Emily saying every teenager deserves to have fun once in a while." Noah laughed for the first time all afternoon. Then I asked the question that mattered most. "Why stay anonymous?" Arthur looked out the cafe window. "Because I wasn't trying to replace anyone." He glanced back at me. "Noah already has a father. I never wanted him to feel like he owed me anything." At that moment, everything finally made sense. The gifts had never been payments. They had never been manipulation. They were one man's quiet attempt to honor the person who had changed his life. And suddenly, I understood why every receipt had been paid in cash. Arthur hadn't wanted recognition. He had simply wanted to keep a promise he'd made to someone who was no longer here. Arthur and I stayed in touch after that afternoon, not because he wanted credit for anything he'd done. In fact, he asked me for one favor before we left the cafe. "Please don't tell people about the gifts." I looked at him. "Why?" He smiled. "Because the moment people hear about them, they stop seeing the reason behind them." I couldn't argue with that. Over the next few months, Noah visited Arthur every Saturday at the library. They never met at his house. They never exchanged expensive presents again. Instead, they spent hours talking about engineering, physics, robotics, and the projects Noah hoped to build in college. Sometimes I'd stop by to pick Noah up. Every single time, I'd find the two of them sitting at the same table surrounded by books, arguing over the best way to solve some impossible design problem. Arthur looked happier than I'd ever seen him. For the first time in years, he had someone to teach. And Noah had found the mentor he'd never realized he needed. About 8 months later, I received a phone call from an attorney's office. Arthur had passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 73. For several seconds I couldn't say a word. I hadn't known he was sick. Neither had Noah. The attorney explained that Arthur had left instructions for only 3 people to be contacted: his lawyer, the director of the public library, and me. A week later, Noah and I attended a small memorial service with fewer than 20 people. Arthur had no children, no close relatives, just a handful of old friends and former co-workers. As everyone was leaving, the attorney approached us carrying a small wooden box. "Mr. Harper," he said, "Arthur asked me to give this to Noah." Inside was an old brass compass. The metal was scratched from years of use, and the glass had a long crack across one corner. Folded beneath it was a handwritten note. "This compass belonged to my father. He carried it every day until he gave it to me, and now I'd like you to have it. Tools eventually wear out. Money eventually disappears. But curiosity, if you protect it, will guide you for the rest of your life. Keep building things that matter. Arthur." Noah read the note twice before quietly placing it back in the box. He didn't cry. Neither did I. Some losses don't leave room for tears, only gratitude. A few months later, Noah received his acceptance letter to Oregon State University. He'd been admitted to study mechanical engineering. The first thing he did after opening the envelope was pick up the old brass compass from his desk. I wish Arthur could have seen this. I smiled. "I think he expected it." Noah laughed softly. "You really think so?" "I do. He saw something in you long before anyone else did. Every now and then, people still ask me about the strange months when expensive gifts kept appearing at our house. Most assume there must have been some hidden motive, some kind of scam, a secret inheritance, a guilty conscience. The truth is far simpler. Arthur wasn't trying to buy my son's affection. He wasn't trying to replace me. He wasn't trying to erase the years he'd lost. He was simply repaying a kindness that had changed the course of his own life. Emily had once believed in a young man who was ready to give up on his future. Decades later, after she'd been gone for years, that same man found a way to honor her by believing in her son. Looking back, I realized the most valuable gift Arthur ever gave Noah wasn't the laptop, the bike, or even the money. It was the confidence to believe that someone saw his potential before the rest of the world did. And every time I see that old brass compass sitting on Noah's desk, I'm reminded that a single act of kindness can keep moving forward through generations, long after the people who started it are gone.